Thanks for all coming. You're all very welcome. I'm really glad we're doing this. And well done to all the ILR guys, Ross, Brendan, Robbie, and the likes. Because, well, it has been the year of the laser. I mean, throughout the whole pandemic, I think, even level 5, we've been allowed to sell lasers for those lucky enough to have their club and their 5K. There's been lots of time in the water, but kind of at the same time, we've got this funny situation where we haven't been able to do any briefings, debriefings, or kind of theory sessions or any of that stuff. So this has come at the perfect time, I guess, to kind of refresh and I suppose learn a bit before we can hit the water properly and do some more coaching sessions as the year goes on. So a little bit about myself. Yeah, I've been through the whole laser circuit, 4.7s, radios, onto the international scene as well. Still aspiring to be big enough for a standard. But yeah, my CV isn't perhaps not as glowing as some of the others you're going to see in future weeks, like Aisling, Johnny, and Jack. But I genuinely believe that since I started coaching, I've become twice a sailor. I personally have been lucky enough to have some really world-class coaches, and certain things, certain phrases have just stuck with me that they've all said, with all their different kind of own philosophies. So you'll see a lot of them tonight in kind of inverted commas. So if things don't make sense along the way, some things might seem a little bit abstract, but there's a simple message behind everything we go through. And if you can remember at least the little phrases, they'll stand to you in the future. But yeah, please don't be afraid to ask questions. I think there's a little Q&A question box at the bottom where you can ask questions anonymously, I think. And Jack's here too to heckle me a bit and to answer your questions and butt in whatever. So yeah, Jack, don't be afraid. So yeah, I suppose the plan, split it up into 3 chapters, if you like. The start line, the upwind, and then the reach and run. Kind of, once you delve into it, you realize that a lot of the concepts are kind of the same or similar enough, at least. So yeah, we'll go through some key kind of tactical aspects, some tricky situations as well that there are a few tricks to get out of, and yeah, we'll dive straight in. So first of all, right, I think it's quite important to, you know, these 2 terms kind of come under the same umbrella, and there's a lot of confusion as to which is which. So they're not, but they're by no means mutually exclusive. They kind of overlap a lot. But the way I think of it, from a sailing perspective anyway, is strategy is kind of your intent. If you were to forget about all the other boats in the race course and just look at the conditions in the day. Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
In the chat here, I'm seeing that they can't see the presentation because you have yourself pinned.
I have myself
on the screen, I think. Even though it's coming up for me.
It's coming up for you, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know.
It says I'm sharing it all right.
That was temporary. It's good now. Are we back? Actually, can people see in the chat? Are we good now? Can people see that? We're cool. Yeah.
Sorry. Thanks, guys. I don't think you missed much. Yeah, strategy, kind of all about the intent. Forget about all the other boats on the course, and it's essentially what is the quickest way around the course. And then when you start to look at the tactics side, it's more about boats and how you kind of apply your strategy to the fleet and racing against other boats. Okay, so this might make a little bit more sense later. I've got a few examples which this is relevant to. So yeah, the best place to start is the start line. So some main factors, there are others of course, but for me the main factors have to be line bias, whatever the tide's doing, if there's any, where the space is on the line. That kind of depends on the conditions too, and is more important in light winds, I guess. And then what's happening up the course. So is there kind of more wind on one side? If you're confident that there's big black cloud on the right, you might want to start committee, tack off, head straight out to more breeze. You might be expecting a wind shift on the left, perhaps off the land. So you start pin so you can take advantage of that. Or is the course skewed? So we'll come to those later again. So I've got a few situations I've made up here. Hopefully they work. But yeah, starting with committee boat bias. I think one thing that has definitely stuck with me is it's not vital that you win the committee boat. There's that phrase, oh, you know, I'm going to go and win the committee boat, but it's starting in the bias third is absolutely good enough. And there's some situations where you can even gain from starting in the bias third, but being below the pack that starts just at the committee boat. So if you kind of focus on the yellow boat here, I'll just play it through first. Let me know if this doesn't play. Okay, so I'll just go back a bit there. But essentially, you get these situations where all these boats who are looking to start on the committee boat are bunching up. And in the case of the yellow guy, he's at the bias end in the bias third, but he has so much more space to play with, because as you go further down the line, boats are going to be bunching up less. So much more space to play with, gets a better acceleration, and ends up in a good situation. And then even further from this, if a left shift comes, if you know a left shift is coming, and we'll get onto this later as well, the yellow guy, here's the left shift coming in, everyone tacks, being the yellow guy, you come out ahead, okay? So yeah, committee boat bias, don't need to win the committee boat, but try and start in the bias third. Okay, so pin end is a slightly different dynamic. I suppose it's more important to win the pin end if it's a really pin end, pin end strong start, but there are other things you can do if you don't win the pin end. So I'll play this one through. So often what happens after pin end start, especially in light winds, is the guy who won the pin, so in this situation, it's this dark blue guy. He's got, all the space in the world to play with. He's got huge leeward gap, clear wind, and he's having a heyday out there. But everyone else after him, everyone's priority is to survive. It's really hard to live in this situation on the hip of someone else when dirty wind is coming off their sail. So it's kind of all about surviving. And as a result, all these boats are going to be really slow. So if you can manage to tack off and tack away from that big clump, you're golden. So that's what the yellow guy manages to do here. He manages to tack away and he just extends. So if you think about it, so the windward mark obviously is up here. So if we draw a line across, dark blue guy is ahead. Yellow guy has gained a lot out of tacking away and has all this space to play with. Leeward gap, clear air, while these guys are still kind of struggling back here. So if you can tack away, do that. A couple of questions coming in there. Is that all good? What kind of software? Yeah, it's umpires use this a lot. I think it's just called Boats or Boat Scenario. You can get it online for free, and it's really handy for kind of visualizing stuff.
And then actually the question from Nicola there, just in case anyone else has the same problem. On the top right of your screen, you can see the 9 dots with view beside it. If anyone else has the same problem as Nicola, where you can see Toby and then the screen's actually in the small bit in the corner, if you click on view, you'll have the option of side-by-side gallery or side-by-side speaker. You want to choose side-by-side gallery. That should fix the problem there.
Thanks, Jack, our resident technician. Okay, so this is a similar thing, but kind of slightly unorthodox. So I'll just grab my pen there. So this yellow guy here is in a compromised situation. Okay, it's pin end bias. We're talking about 30-40 seconds to go, and if this is the pin end ley line, it's unlikely that he's gonna, in 30 seconds time, it's unlikely that he's gonna get away and go below this dark blue guy. But I'll just play it and see what happens. There's a nice way of getting out of the situation. So you could just kind of tack into that gap, little double tack, as we saw in the last situation. But I'm going to show you guys a video in a second of one of the world's best laser sailors pulling this off. So here we go. Okay, so obviously, if the whole fleet was doing this, it wouldn't work, because it takes one guy coming across on starboard to wipe out this yellow guy. But the point is, if you're in this tricky situation, and you do end up on port, if you can duck astern, you'll get a boost from ducking astern if you treat it like a trigger pull, and if you escape from that pack, you're looking good. So I'll just show you a little video here.
We see the Norwegian Herman Thomasgaard closest to us. And Jordan, how do you think that battle will work itself out in the next few seconds?
Well, what could work out against them, though, is third and fourth are going to have a bit of a match race at the same time. So it's going to be hard for Wern to bring that extra boat up and into the line.
So it's pin end bias, and they're all kind of lining up. I want you to look at, I think it's the second from the pin, it's the British boat, and he's in a little bit of a compromised situation here. Look at what he does.
They're really not doing too much. You can see they've just sort of got their eye on each other. Just in the very right back of shot, you can actually see they're lined up next to each other. It's going to be fun. It looks a bit mild at the moment for my taste.
The Cypriot and the Australian at the top end on the right-hand side there. So 3 Britons, 2 Australians, 5 other nationalities on the start line, and some big battles coming up. But Contides, the Cypriot, and Wern of Australia, they are fighting for gold. 4 others are all in the hunt for medals as well. And the laser medal race is away. 3 medals, 6 sailors in the hunt then, as we see the Norwegian Herman Thomasgaard closest to us. It's a clear start.
So, so that Brit guy, Nick Thompson, who ducked everyone else, I don't think I can use a pointer. No, I can't use a pointer here. But he ends up in a really good place out of this situation, and he's in the middle of the course, playing the shifts.
Toby, I have a question. It's a good way to bail out, but is there a way of avoiding having to bail out, or is there a certain time that you should kind of cut your losses and call it quits and kind of go back to for a bit further down the line to find a better spot?
Yeah, it's a good question. It kind of does depend on the wind conditions. So if it's windy, like in this situation, you can leave it late enough, because you're going to cover ground quickly. The boat's quite maneuverable. But in light winds, you don't want to be messing around trying to find a new gap in the last 30 seconds, I'd say. Obviously, there's personal preference. But yeah, so in his condition, in these conditions, last 30 seconds, bails out. This is just an example of kind of staying calm in a compromised situation and making the most out of it. That's kind of what it's all about. But yeah. Okay, so this is one we see quite a lot. And sometimes it's kind of caused or induced by tide coming straight down. So I'll get my pen out. Every time you see a squiggly line, it's tide. So this often happens when there's strong tide against the fleet at the start line, but can often just happen anyway. We end up with this huge line sag, right? So again, here's the line. Huge sag down here, or a banana, as some people call it. And it's interesting because it's kind of an optical illusion, and we're all guilty of it. So if you think about this yellow guy, if he looks down towards the pin, all he's seeing, the yellow guy looks towards the pin, all he sees is a line of boats, all the way to the pin. Okay, so he thinks he's on the line. Looks this way, line of boats straight to the committee boat, thinks he's on the line. So yeah, it absolutely is a bit of an optical illusion. But this is where transits become really important. And we'll get on to what a transit is and how to get one. But this is just an example of if you know there's a line sag. So one way you might expect a line sag to come is, for example, in the Irish fleet, it's the full rigs that start first, I think. Yeah, full rigs. If you're in the radial fleet, your start's in 5 minutes time. And what I'd always do is I'd try and look at the standard start and try and gain as much information as I can. So if there's a line sag in the standard start, there's a high chance there's going to be a line sag in the radials too. So you can kind of see these things coming. But you can gain a lot out of it. So if you're this yellow guy, you're starting in the middle, and you know there's a line sag, okay? You could just sail straight up to the line with 40 seconds to go. But what's going to happen then is everyone else in the middle is going to follow you because they think, right, this guy, he's ballsy, but he probably knows what he's doing if he's going ahead of everyone else, okay? So if you wait in this line sag and then just simply accelerate 5 seconds earlier, you can end up in a really lovely position. So if we watch the yellow guy here. He just accelerates a couple seconds earlier, and now he's in the middle of the course and got all this space to play with. Okay, so yeah.
So we have a quick question. What is a transit?
Yeah.
How do you get one?
Just getting onto that now. I'll show you. So we're in tropical West Cork right now, okay? And conveniently the course is set up right beside a volcanic island. So essentially what a transit is if you're on the line, okay, and you don't have to use this on the start line, you can use it on the other legs too. Sorry for my bad looking boats. But what you do is you look towards the pin end, okay, so this is your eyesight. And you see what it lines up with on the land, and from that you can gauge where you are on the line if you're above and below. So what you want to do 5 minutes before the start, make sure that the pin end is actually laid and not floating around. But before you start, come up to the committee boat, look across, see if anything lines up. So in this case, volcano, handily lines up, right? So then when it comes to the start, if you're in the middle here, so say you're below the start, like in our previous situation, okay? And you look, you line your eyesight up with the pin end, what you're going to see is, well, you're going to see a load of water here, okay? So alarm bells should be ringing. I'm way below the line, okay? And then obviously the other way around. You're above the line. Your eyesight's going to be below below the volcano there, okay? So really useful, really underrated. There are loads of situations, like it's such a simple thing to have, and even if you don't use it, to be aware of it is really important. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Okay, just to end our start stuff, something we often don't think about is tide coming from the side on the start line. It can really create space and can also destroy it as well. So in this situation here, we've got strong tide from the left to right, and we've all been that guy or girl who waits around here. It's 1 minute to go, and waits for a gap to open up in here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now I'll show you a situation where it doesn't work. So if that tide is coming from left to right, space is really going to close up at the committee boat, okay? And it's really important you're aware of this, because as this red boat, there's no chance you're getting a gap, and you're going to be stuck behind everyone else. So yeah, sorry about the boats squiggling about, but essentially, tide comes from left to right, the pack bunches up, this red guy hasn't a chance of getting in there, okay? But on the other hand, if you're aware that the tide's going the other way, gap opens up, lovely gap, lovely start, okay? So yeah, if you're gonna be this guy, this red guy, flying in at the last minute, make sure you know what the tide's doing. Okay, ways of reading tide is really important, because I'd say after what the wind's doing, the tide has to be the second most important factor in the race course, especially in Ireland. Like obviously it'll depend where you go. But for a lot of our venues, tide is vital. So it's really important to know what it's doing. Some of you guys might recognize this. This is Strangford Lock. And you get a lot of tide through the mouth of the lock. And it's really obvious which way it's going because of this turbulence that ends up after the mark, or in this case, the turbine, I think it's called. So yeah, tide's obviously going in this direction, okay? Same thing below, find a mark, look at the tide streams, tide's going this way, okay, with all this turbulence behind. That's quite an obvious one, you'll always be looking out for that. And then another great one is popping a bottle in the water. You need to put it beside a reference point that's stuck in the same position. So get your bottle, put it beside a mark, give it a minute, see how far it floats and in what direction it floats. And that way you can clearly see what the tide's doing. Make sure there's some water or something heavy in the bottle. Otherwise, if it's too light, the wind's just going to take it away. And pick your bottle up again, of course. What else? You can think ahead. And this is what I used to do. Sorry, here, 1 sec. The night before I started racing in a venue I've never been at before, I'd look at tidal charts. These are kind of widely available for most big sailing venues. Both have some really good ones. So, for example, what I do is the night before, make out a little situation. So here's the land. I'm just drawing what I'm seeing over here. You're expecting the tide to come this way, and you're expecting, let's say, a westerly wind, and kind of draw out the race course. Here's your windward mark, and then start line. So immediately, it's pretty obvious to me that when the flood tide's at its strongest, there's going to be a lot of tide going from left to right. Okay, so what I might do there is try and hit the left side out here because the tide's going this way. If you hit the right side, you're going to end up way down here. Okay, so that's your windward mark there. So just kind of make out these scenarios in your head, even if it isn't exactly what happens on the day. I think it's good for your confidence to kind of have an idea of what might happen. Sorry, these sketches aren't coming out as good as I'd like them to, but anyway, yeah, hopefully that's clear. Okay, so onto the beat. Few more factors: wind strength, wind shift, tide, and then we're going to look at situations where. So we're getting into kind of more tactical stuff now, and what are the other boats doing? So I'll introduce the concept of leverage, which is essentially how far you go away from a group of boats. The further away you are, the more leverage you have, and if you get the shift right, you're going to gain lots. If you get it wrong, you're going to lose lots. So as we start to go into tactics, we're kind of looking more into risk against the other boats, what works and what doesn't. So yeah, first, the most important thing, I suppose, is going through the types of wind shifts. So I like to split them into three. This might be different for other people, but for me, they're pretty clear in three distinct categories. So the first is oscillations. It's pretty simple when it's going back and forth in regular patterns. So 2 minutes one way, 3 minutes one way, 2 minutes one way, 3 minutes the other way. And this often happens when there's an onshore breeze. The wind will really consistently kind of move back and forth. And as there's an offshore breeze, it's going to be a little bit more drastic. But it's amazing. Like, I never used a compass, but you can use a compass for this. It's amazing how much you realize how distinct it can be sometimes, like 2 minutes, 20 seconds one way, 2 minutes, 20 seconds the next way. So it's really important when you hit that race course, you don't even need to do a speed test with anyone else before you do this. Just sail upwind on your own from the start line and just get a feel for the shifts and if there's any kind of pattern. Because if you can figure out that pattern, and you become in sync with the shifts, you're golden. And so this little graphic down here, it's kind of illustrating that on days where it's oscillating, you don't want to get too far to one side, okay? Because you're going to hit the ley line and you're not going to be able to take advantage from shifts anymore. If you play the middle of the course, you can always be on the lifted tack all the way up to the top. And then another situation where it's particularly useful, a bit like what we saw earlier, if you know the wind is in right phase, now this is getting quite complicated, but the more practice, the more it makes sense, I guess, is the only way. But if you know the wind's in right phase 1 minute before the start, okay, so you might go head to wind, look straight upwind. Are you pointing towards the right or to the left? Okay, so you should be tracking this. If you know you're in right phase 1 minute before the start, then after the start, there's a chance it's going to go left. So that's what this graphic over here shows. Okay, so this purple guy, right phase at the start. So initially, it looks like he's not doing that well. but he knows that left shift is coming. So he positions himself to the left of the bunch and tacks across when that left shift comes. Okay, so that's the main idea with oscillation. So that's called getting the first shift. If you can get the first shift, you immediately you're spat out the front of the group, and from there it's simple and winning the race. So yeah, the second type I'll talk about is persistent shift. So this is a shift that's just kind of tracking one way the whole time. So it's quite common for sea breezes in Ireland in the summer. As the day goes on, the wind follows the sun. So for us, the wind in the northern hemisphere, the sun moves right throughout the day. So the wind kind of slowly shifts right. So that's a persistent shift. And within this persistent shift, you'll get little oscillations. But yeah, it also happens, possibly, this one will probably make more sense. In the bottom left here, we have a little situation where the land is on the left and these blue arrows are the wind, and they're kind of curving around the land. Some of you guys have probably heard the phrase land left, go left, which is a bit of a banker. So we've got this kind of long persistent shift around the left side here. So if I play the video, yellow versus blue. Yellow hits the left side, gets on the inside of the shift, gains from it, okay? Blue hits the right side, isn't on the inside of the shift, yada, yada, yada. And then the other diagram over here is essentially the same thing. So this is your windward mark up here. This is your start line. The green line is the persistent wind shift as we go up the course. And this just shows this blue guy here, how much less distance he sails. So where he sails 6, the pink sails the equivalent of 8, right? So that just shows how much you can save by being in the inside of the persistent shift. Cool. The third, the way I kind of like to see it is kind of shifts that come with gusts. So here, in the top right is just a little example. So you've probably all seen this when you're walking your local pier or whatever, but the wind on a windy day will come up over objects, kind of hit the water, come down, and then spread out in these big patches, okay, really violently. And it's kind of interesting the way they spread out. So they kind of hit the water and spread out like a hand. Oops, one sec. Change color. So these guys kind of hit the water and spread out kind of like a hand. They kind of spread out. Now that's a hand with 6 fingers, but you get what I mean, right? And as it happens, you can get a nice lift at the edge of these gusts, okay? So on a gusty day, your sole kind of goal should be to link up as many gusts as you can and be in as much pressure as you can throughout the course. But you do get kind of lifted on the edge of them. We've got a good example coming up. So yeah, on a gusty day, don't bang corners unless there's a good reason to do so. So banging corners is where you just kind of sail straight out to one side of the beat, straight up to the ley line, and then straight in on the next tack. And that's the most risky thing you can do. So on a gusty day, I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, so on a larger scale, the big dark patches that come with big dark clouds kind of work the same way. So if I draw a little race course here, pin end, committee boat, start line, and here's the windward mark. There's clearly more wind on the right here, darker patches, less wind on the left. Okay. These big dark patches are kind of basically big gusts. So they spread out like hands too. And if you can sail off to this side, right? You don't want to overlay here. It's really important because you won't gain if you overlay. But if you hit that gust, you're going to get lifted along the edge of it as well. So you're getting more pressure and you're getting a lift. So sail for gusts is the moral of that story. Just one last thing on this. If you think there's more wind on one side, but you're not sure, so well, in this example on the left here, it's pretty obvious that there's a big fat storm on the left side. But if you think there's more wind on the left side, you're not sure. A phrase I like to keep in mind is bite bits off the cake. So this is really kind of tactically. So your strategy might say, I think there's more wind on the left. I'm going to send it straight out to the left. But your tactic says, okay, hold on, that's really risky. What if that doesn't work? So yeah, bite bits off the cake is the answer to that. Go out left for a bit. Come back on a left shift, see if you gain against everyone else. If it works, go left, bite another bit off the cake, come back, make these little gains against other people throughout the course. And it's that kind of tactical idea that the best sailors have. Like I remember when I was in radials, Jack was often the guy to beat, okay? And I'd always go, what happens often is you'll go up to people before the start and you'll be like, oh, what way are you going up the course? Do you think the left side's better, right out? That's a common conversation I have before a race, as you guys know. And I remember going up to Jack, and he'd always say, "Oh, I'm just gonna play the fleet." And I used to always think, "Oh, you're so annoying. You're not telling me where you're gonna go." But in reality, that's how it works. The top guys will do what it takes to win, but they're consistent in doing it.
Yeah,
Right?
Toby, actually, just on that, yeah, I can see why that does sound like someone's kind of pseudoscience, just kind of giving you a very vague answer, just kind of giving you the gob. But if a lot of the time going left, say a lot of the fleet goes over towards the left side, then to go over to the left, you essentially have to bang a corner. Whereas flip it around, if a lot of the fleet goes to the right side, going to the left of the course will just be the left of the fleet, which if everyone goes really far right, will actually will be the middle of the course. So that's a lot of what playing the fleet means. It's not actually just the kind of exact kind of square or the diamond of the course. It's not that in itself. It's actually on where in the course you are compared to the rest of the fleet.
Yeah, exactly. So this example kind of explains what you're saying, I think. So if we watch this, so this yellow guy down here, is a bow length or two behind these blue guys. Okay, so this is a group. This yellow guy is slightly behind, and he thinks there's more wind, or she thinks there's more wind on the left, and they deal with it in a pretty nice way. So yellow tacks off, gets to the left of the fleet, tacks back, right? And at this point, they realize that they've made a pretty good gain, okay? So if you compare this to where they were when they started, yellow's made a gain, okay? So they're thinking, that worked, there must be more wind on the left. I'm gonna bite some more off the cake. And it's not too risky. They're not absolutely banging the left corner, but they're playing the fleet nicely and they end up in front from it. So hopefully that makes sense, but yeah, I like that one.
I'll say one more thing, just on that, in that kind of situation where you've been a bit further behind and you've caught a shift and you've caught back up to everyone, you do need to back yourself again to make the right decision. You kind of got to back your strategy. To see the second tack that the yellow boat makes, if they'd probably stayed on that course, there would have been probably level pegging, but it's just, you need to really back yourself that you've made the right decision, that the left is better, and then take another tack again to even come out even further ahead, to go from, so you've gone from behind to level pegging, and then take the next leap back yourself to take it one more time and go ahead.
Exactly, because if you're doing things in little chunks, if one time you tack off, come back, it doesn't work. You've only lost a little bit because it was a little chunk, right? But most of the time, if you know what you're doing, you're going to gain. And that's what we mean by playing the fleet and gradually working your way up and being clever about it. And so this one is particularly relevant on shifty days, really gusty kind of days, when the windward mark, so what will often happen is the windward mark will be just under the land. On an offshore day, the windward mark will probably be just under the land as it happens. And it's going to be most gusty and shifty up at the top of the course. So one way to deal with that is to try and hit what we call the sweet spot. So in each of these situations, the sweet spot is this kind of black X here. So we're talking like 10, 20 boat lengths under the windward mark, and that's a sweet spot. So in a lot of situations, you want to try and hit that as much as you can, especially if you're kind of leading a group. So if we look at the left-hand side first, kind of keep an eye on the yellow guy. He hits the sweet spot and he gains the most from the left shift. Okay, so they're all going along normally. Wind shifts left, the old tack, as you do when you're on a header. And as it happens, the guy who is on the left, even though it's a left shift, doesn't gain because he's overlaying now. The yellow guy hit the sweet spot and he gains from the shift, and the dark blue guy, he wasn't on the inside of the shift, so he doesn't gain, okay? So if you're this middle guy, you're pretty much always going to end up in a decent situation when you get these random shifts up at the top of the course. And then this is just showing the complete opposite situation. Wind shifts right, and again, the yellow gains out of it the most, right? So there's no point going for a gust and a right shift at the top of the course if you're going to overlay it by miles, okay? Another phrase for you guys: nothing good happens on ley lines. It's kind of a good rule to go by. Here's just a quick example of, this is the standard world championships, and it's a qualifying race, so there are about 60 boats in this fleet, and this kind of thing occurs.
Looking at now, putting in the hard work. Yeah.
It's interesting that in that leading five,
For us to tell, because we're not out on the water and we don't see what's coming.
Right, so it's a pretty big fleet, and what is often the case in laser races, the guys who are behind have sent it straight out to the side. They probably got a bad start. They're taking risks. They're going beyond the ley line. There's a small chance that they're going to come out good from it. And if these guys who are winning the race, who are doing well, they're in the middle of the course, so they're kind of hitting this sweet spot here. If we look at Pavlos, Contides, Tom Burton, the top two sailors there are hitting that sweet spot, and they're going to gain from whatever happens at the top of the course.
But I would say that the group with, that pack with Pavlos and Tom, and they're looking to be the leaders.
so the yellow lines are the ley lines. That's the optimum line into the mark.
Well, it's not necessarily the optimum mark in the course, but if you're over that line, so more towards the top of the screen, I would say, then you're sailing extra distance. Yeah, and you don't want.
So the commentary kind of says it there. But yeah, I won't play much more of that. But those leaders are really trying to hit the middle of the course, so that they gain from whatever comes at the top. This one's common enough, and it's pretty simple. So before the start, one thing I'd try and do is just go head to wind for a second, sail flapping, look straight up the course, right? See where the windward mark is. So in this case, it's quite obvious the windward mark is way off to the left. So it's skewed to the right, I think is the right term for that. But essentially, we end up in this situation where we've got starboard's the long tack, port's the short tack, okay? So the phrase here is sail the long tack first, okay? So what happens, one sec. If you sail the short tack first, right, you hit the ley line really quickly, okay? All of a sudden you're on the ley line, okay? And this is very early to be on the ley line. And if anything happens here, you can't gain. If you get headed, the guys on the left are going to gain, okay? If you get a lift, you're way over the ley line, so you're not going to gain, okay? So this is why we say try and sail the long tack first. Okay, it's kind of related to the whole sweet spot thing, because if you make your way out here, you know, probably going to play a few shifts on the way up, but you're hitting that sweet spot. You're keeping your options open and you're staying away from ley lines, okay? And it's the complete opposite, or it's the same concept if it's skewed the other way, okay? Sail the port tack first, okay? So keep your options open. And so kind of what we were saying earlier, this can even, if it's a big factor, this can even affect your start strategy, okay? So I'd really be looking to start committee here and tacking off. Okay, so how are we for time? Okay, we're almost at the hour. Yeah, just a few things on reaching and running. Definitely, like a lot of us kind of, myself included, especially on a windy day, once you've done your beat, you're wrecked. You kind of treat the reach and run as a chance to kind of rest, but there are huge opportunities to gain and catch up on the reach and run. So the first concept I want to introduce is the run line on the reach. So it's pretty simple. The run line is just straight line from the windward mark to the pin end, okay? And what often happens is if there are big clumps of boats, right, everyone gets all close together and oops, sorry, this happens. They'll all push each other up. Okay. And what I'm saying here is if you're behind a clump who are messing around with each other, pushing each other up, fighting for clear air, sailing so much extra distance, and if you're behind, if you're this red guy, you've got the best seat in the house because you're watching them sail way off, and all you have to do is sail straight for the mark. And by sailing so much less distance, you can gain so much. And so, yeah, the idea is don't be lazy and just do what the rest of the pack is doing, because you can gain a lot. So I'll play that one more time. It's obviously a little bit exaggerated, but the red guy gains a serious amount here. Okay. Okay, this is a huge one. Staying uptight of the fleet. So it's relevant for pretty much every leg of the course. But here's another situation where if you're going downwind and you're behind, you've got a really good opportunity to catch up. Because if the fleet are sleeping, what's going to happen is if the tide's really strong, everyone's going to end up out here, okay? And to these guys, they might not even feel like they've drifted so much because you're just focusing on the next mark all the time. But if you're behind, it's an easy game. Because if you come around behind a group, right? Sorry, this is a little bit out of scale. And you look straight down at the leeward mark, it's going to be fairly obvious to you that the whole fleet is off to one side. And okay, of course, there might be a reason why they're out there. There might be more wind, but on a really tidal day, it can be really obvious. And all you need to do is point your bow this side of the mark, and your boat will track downwind this way, right? And you'll end up sailing so much less distance to these guys who were caught napping, okay? So yeah, again, hopefully that makes sense. So stay up tide of the fleet. This is up tide of the fleet. Yeah, then one last phrase to remember, take your speed towards the mark. So this is particularly relevant for the reach and the run. So what often happens, we had this situation, the Dublin lads had this situation the last time I had them, I think, where the waves are offset. So this is the wind direction and this is the wave direction. So these waves are probably built up from a different direction the day before, and you end up with offset waves. And they can be really hard to deal with, because to catch these waves, if you're this guy, right? To catch these waves, you're going to need to come up, okay? If you want to surf them and gain from them. But the problem is, if you just keep surfing waves, you're going to end up down here, right? So what we mean by take your speed towards the mark is once you're up and surfing, okay, so you come up and get the wave. As you're surfing the wave, come across the wave and take your speed in the direction of the mark, okay? Come up and get another wave. And you're kind of doing this thing the whole way down, and you'll end up way better off than this guy who has to fight the waves the whole way back and isn't surfing, okay? It's kind of the same for the reach. You guys have probably heard the phrase, go up in the lulls and down in the gusts. So say there's a gust here, and you're this orange fella. So you're in a lull at the moment, right? So you want to head up. Once you hit that gust, take the gain, boat gets planing, take your speed towards the mark, okay? No point just continuing to sail high, and take that speed towards the mark. One more thing that's kind of a bit of a banker: when it's really light, downwinds, you really want to stay away from big packs of boats. So in this situation, the blue guys are all packed together, all on top of each other, dirty wind, not enough space to do the kind of maneuvers they want to do, and they're essentially just slowing each other down. So by not sailing by sailing a tiny bit of extra distance, but kind of skirting yourself around the group, you can gain a lot. So look at the red and yellows, they're behind. They avoid the pack. And they end up ahead, okay? So avoid packs, groups of boats, or whatever you want to say. Yeah, here's just another fun situation of that. So, so if I was the yellow guy, and this is another strategy versus tactics example. So I think that, or I know that this mark here is the bias gate. So especially for you guys who are doing youth nationals, you'll have gates at youth nationals, I think. So so number 2 here on this side is it's the bias mark. Okay. So in a normal situation, without these boats, okay, if you're this yellow guy, you're thinking, okay, yellow mark's biased, I'm going to go for that. But what's often the case is in light winds, big fleets, right? You can actually gain from avoiding packs again. So this is something you want to weigh up. So the other guys are busy sorting themselves out, getting into trouble. As the yellow guy, you're on your own, clean air the whole way, no messing. And you can end up gaining a lot from it, okay? So that's pretty much it. Sorry if I flew through any of that. And also sorry if some of it was abstract in any way, but there was kind of a simple message behind all of it. And even if you remember those key phrases, they've worked for me throughout my sailing life so far. And yeah, any questions, fire ahead. I'd be more than happy to answer. Thanks, guys.
That was brilliant, Toby.
Thanks, Jack.
That was great, Toby. Thanks very much. Have to say, some great pointers in there, and great use of technology as well. It's brilliant. Having all the diagrams there to show us the different situations. Listen, anyone any questions, put them up now and we can answer them.
There was one good question I saw there from William about half an hour ago. Yeah. In terms of, I think, was line bias. What's the best way to see if there's a line bias?
Yeah, good question. So I might.
Yeah, I actually have it now. What is the best way to assess the bias of the line? At what time is best to check the line bias? Or I should just copy and paste that into the chat again so people can see it.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, good question. There are a few ways to do this. The more you sail, the more it kind of becomes instinct as to which one it is. But that's a bad answer. One way, a simple one that I like to use, if I draw a start line here, I go to the committee boat, point my bow towards the mark, and if I'm on a broad reach, the committee boat is biased, and if I'm on a tight reach, then the pin end's biased. That's the one I go to. But then there are the ones you can pick a mate and time it so that you both go off each side at the same time, come across, and whoever crosses, well, that's the bias side. So when do you check it? Well, don't check it before they've laid the pin end in the committee boat anyway. Once they've done that, check it. But as I was saying earlier, keep an eye on the shifts, and if there are any oscillations, the bias could significantly change at any point in time. So yeah, one more, I suppose. Pop yourself head to wind on the line, right? And if the pin end appears higher to you, it's biased, okay, or whatever. And then, yeah, one more. Just look at the starts that have happened before you, I suppose. And just by looking at the fleet, it can be quite obvious, I think. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'd say the best place to sit when you're actually looking at the previous starts is above either the committee boat or above the pin end. You have to make sure you're out of the way of anyone sailing up the pin end, or make sure you're out of the way of anyone that tacks off the committee boat and goes on port straight away. But as long as you're out of the way of those two, that's probably the best place, because you can see the entire line from kind of in front.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you won't have any other boats getting in your way. So kind of up here is where I'd like to sit. And some guys like that as well. You get a good view of what's going on at the start before you, and yeah, no one's going to be in your line of sight.
All right, that's great, guys. Any more questions there, Jack? Is there?